Okay, so I went back and added another um, cube here, but let's just keep moving around here. And then here what we have is we have all the selections that we ended up using, so no big deal there. All right, now you see this X, Y, and Z, and this won't matter right now, but what we can do is we can actually lock axes. So if we don't want to scale a certain axis, let's say we didn't want to scale something in the Y, we could end up turning this off. It's not meaning anything now, but that's what this is for. And then we have the coordinate system. And this won't mean anything right now, but you'll see this later, is once we actually start moving objects and rotating them around our scene, our coordinates sort of get a little wonky. So we end up changing it from world and then from object. And we'll go back into that a little bit later. Now over here, what we have is we have the render systems. And rendering is what it looks like when it's all said and done. Now right now my scene is very dull. It doesn't have any materials or anything like that, but that is fine for now. All right. So whenever we want to see what our project looks like or what it looks like in real time, you can click this first slate. And then I'm just kind of clicking off to get that to move off. All right, and then you have this render picture viewer. We're not going to mess with this right now, but we can render pictures piece by piece to see what our animations are going to look like. And one of the things about 3D animation, if we take a look quickly at the timeline, what it is that these are not seconds, these are frames. All right, so that means my timeline is 90 images or 90 pictures, so to speak. So we'll get into that a little bit later as we dive deeper. And then we have the third slate. And we actually want to go into this because I want to take a look at my settings. So let's just click here. And we're not going to go through all of this, but there are certain things that I want to change at this point. So if we look, I do have an output, and this is important. A lot of times you end up using After Effects with Cinema, and you have to make sure that your output and all your settings are actually the same. Otherwise, After Effects will kick the project out and won't read it. So by default, what we want to do is let's go ahead into the preset. So I'm just going to click here and let's go into film and video. And I'm going to go down and look at my settings. And I'm going to look at this HD TV 1080-24. That probably looks familiar because that's what we've been doing most of the time here. So I do want to choose that HD TV 1080-24. And now we know that our settings will match. So if we're mixing this with video content or whatever, we know everything is going to be the same size dimensions and the same aspect ratio. So let's just hit X. We're not going to worry about the rest of this right now. We'll get back into that later. All right. And then let's take a look over here. And these are your objects. So anything that has an arrow, if I click and hold this down, you can see that I have basic shapes or basic 3D shapes to say. And everything that you sort of see when you're working with 3D animation, let's say I was making a car, we would start it off with a cube. Now I would make it more rectangular, but you start off with a cube. Like a person, I might actually start a person off with some type of cylinder. So it really just depends on what you're actually creating. And we're going to end up using these 3D objects to actually start generating content. All right. Next, you have your spline. So think of this as, the curves tool in Illustrator where you actually draw in curves, the pen tool. It's pretty much lines. So whenever you're drawing lines in Illustrator, that's what this is. But the thing about this is that we can take those lines and then make 3D shapes out of them, which is really, really cool. All right, now what I have sort of the new version, and the version that's on the computers, this literally just came out. So when I downloaded it, it gave me the new version. So what's here is a little bit different. I have two squares. You probably only have one that's here. And what we have some symmetry and things like that. So we can go in and work with these. We're not concerned about these right now. This is something that we'll come into, but these are sort of modeling tools that allow us to specify our model. So let's say if I was creating a person, you only rig or create half of that person, and then you use something like a symmetry to duplicate the other half. So you only have to model one half of a person, and then I can use the symmetry and it copies that side over, which is really, really cool. And then we have generator objects, and this is something that we'll get into a little bit later. Let me put that in the scene. Let me delete that. All right. And then we have our MoGraph, and this is something that we'll get into later, but this allows us to do some really, really cool things moving forward. We're not there yet, but this is the power of Cinema 4D, is actually using the MoGraph. So the cloner, say for instance, we'll talk about this for a second. If let's say that I create a person and I want like 10 of the same thing, 10 of this person, well, I could use a cloner, and I can clone that 3D model as many times as I like using this. So that's the real power. So you really only have to model something once, and then you can clone things and do that type of stuff. All right, we're not going to get into volume builder or any of that, but let's move over here. And this is what we call deformers. And we can go in and bend objects, twist objects, bold objects, and we'll work with a little bit of these later. Over here we have floor and sky, so we can mimic the sky that's outside using an HDRI sky. We'll talk about that later, but we can come in and use this and sort of set up an environment. Right here we have cameras. So just like our cameras work, your 7Ds work in the real world, well, guess what? We can let cameras work that same way. We can choose focal length. We can do all those cool things in this software where it mimics a real world camera. And then last that's on this list is lights. And these are really, really important. Just think of lighting as how important it is in regular videography. You need it, especially if you're inside. Well, in 3D, you always need it. Lighting is everything. It's so important. Lighting and materials are everything. That's what makes 3D look great and good. And we're going to talk about that. And we can set up 3-point lighting in our application or in our set here if we want to. All right. So next what we'll do, we'll just kind of keep moving around the panel, and we'll talk about how we actually move around in the scene.